Hi, everyone. Welcome to the February 11th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined in just a second by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, I think the major focus is on a couple of Derby preps from last weekend. We'll start at Tampa Bay Downs and take it track by track, analyzing the Sam F. Davis, which was run last Saturday. We'll move on to Santa Anita and talk about Nadal's win in the Grade 2 San Vicente, which took place last Sunday. A lot of feelings about the two horses coming out of those races, or I should say three horses, because the top two coming out of the Sam F. Davis both ran well. Then we'll move on to some other venues. We'll talk about another three-year-old stakes race from Aqueduct, which may or may not turn out to be a Derby prep. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about a few stakes and non-stakes performances from Gulfstream, Oakland Park, Fairgrounds, and one race from Delta Downs at the very end. Craig, I'm looking forward to talking about these three-year-old races with you because I think there are different takes on these races, and I think the two of us might have some different opinions about them.
Yeah, it was quite the weekend of racing. I thought a little more exciting than I thought going in. And the Davis, I think, is where we're going to start. And I just thought it was a pretty strong race from the top two. I do think we're probably going to disagree a little bit about Independence Hall, and that's okay. The one thing I do want to cover on that is that the figure that we made and why it came out the way it did. The winner, Sol Volante, I'll start with him. He was really impressive. He did track a very fast pace early. It wasn't a fast pace throughout, as I'm going to get to in a minute. The first half mile was really quick. He was way off of it. Independence Hall sat in behind the two leaders, tracking just a couple lengths off. And Sol Volante just made a really good extended run. What's interesting, I think, if you look at our pace figures with him, is he ran pretty evenly throughout the race. There's not a lot of variance among his figures. So that pretty much tells you he got a really good trip. I'm not saying it's a great trip, but it was a good trip. He ran and adapted to the pace scenario, whereas Independence Hall was up a lot closer to that quick pace. Our early pace figures are in the 130s, but he did not get a pace upgrade in here, and that's the one point I want to talk about. I had some questions from our boss even on that, and the reason that is, he got a 1:11 TimeformUS speed figure, and that's the same as his final time figure. The reason is it just dropped off so severely between that half mile and the 3/4 mile to go from those 130s to only a 1:11 for Independence Hall. So through lots of data, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, even before TimeformUS came about when I was pacefigures.com. I did a lot of studies on this, and it just didn't pay to reward horses that with extra points for their speed figure for that kind of trip. In my opinion, and I agree, reading the old Andy Beyer books, I think it was the one on trip handicapping. He would have termed this basically the dream trip. He had a name for it, but just tracking two leaders in the clear by yourself, even when the pace is quick, was kind of a dream trip. And I'm not saying it's an easy trip. I think it was just okay, but I wanted to explain why we don't give a big upgrade in that situation. Had the pace remained hot and maybe the 3/4 mile was in a 125 where it didn't drop off so severely from a 137 to a 111, he certainly would have got an upgrade. But in this case, I think Sol Volante was probably the better horse. He ran the smarter race. He was able to adapt to the pace a little better. But I don't have any problem with anybody thinking both the top two ran well. As for the rest, forget it. They were pretty terrible. I'm not sure what Aja Weed was doing. He was about 8 million lengths off the screen, and nobody else was ever really a factor in here.
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on the race. I wouldn't say my take is completely different. I do think Independence Hall ran well. And I saw two takes coming out of the race on social media, especially a lot of people saying that Independence Hall, based on this performance, is probably more of a one-turn horse and he shouldn't be pointed towards the Kentucky Derby. I saw other people, myself included, saying that Independence Hall in this race showed that he really is a true Derby contender because, in my opinion, I thought he showed more stamina in this race than he had in a lot of his other races. Regarding the pace, the numbers don't lie, so I'm not going to dispute them at all. It was not an exceptionally fast pace. Even if you compare it to last year's Tampa Bay Derby over the same track and distance, the Tacitus won. That was an extremely fast-paced situation going a mile and a 16th in a race that totally fell apart at the end. So, I mean, if you laid those two races on top of each other, the leaders in this Sam F. Davis would have been significantly behind the pace setter in that race, who I believe was Zendon. I don't know, that race took place a long time ago. But the point I want to make about this Sam F. Davis that made the pace situation a little different than what you were describing as, just one horse stalking two speeds is that for whatever reason, those two speeds just were completely gassed after 6 furlongs, maybe even 5 furlongs. I mean, they just Chapelou and the other horse, Premier Star, just came up totally empty with about 3/8 of a mile to go in the race. And that put Jose Ortiz and Independence Hall in the awkward position of having to choose how much or decide how much are these horses slowing down ahead of me? When am I supposed to move? Do I want to maintain the significant advantage that I built up on the horses that are way behind me because they're probably the true threats in the race? And if you look at the actual raw times of the race, Independence Hall really slowed down for that third quarter and then actually had to speed up in the stretch. And he actually ran his final quarter mile in 24 and change. He and Sol Volante were the only horses that broke that 25-second barrier for the final quarter mile of this race, which you could see running through the stretch as everybody else was just going up and down, and these two were really accelerating away from the field again. I like that Independence Hall showed in this race that he has multiple gears. What I don't like is that he still was so keen in the early going. I think the biggest obstacle for this horse moving forward is not his physical makeup or his pedigree, because he's bred to go these distances. He's bred to go a mile and an eighth or farther. All of his siblings are capable route horses, and he's by constitution. The issue with Independence Hall for me is that he's so keen in these races, and he just seems to be, even when he was more relaxed in the paddock and in the post parade, even in the first part of the race, he was just expending too much energy, tugging at Jose Ortiz. He had his head bowed going around the clubhouse turn, just wanting to do more. It's not like he was fighting the rider, but he just wasn't totally shut off the way that you want to see a horse be shut off to go longer distances than this. So I'm encouraged by a lot of things I saw from him in this race. The speed figure is what it is. I'm not going to dispute it. I just get the sense that he's a horse that took a step in the right direction. And if he can continue improving on those things that we saw as issues in the past, I think the future looks pretty bright for him, even on the Derby trail. As far as the winner, Sol Volante, I'm fine admitting I was just wrong about him. He's not a turf horse. He's a dirt horse. He's run better on the dirt than he has in his turf races, I think, twice now, especially in this race. He did get a good trip because he closed into that quick pace. The fact that nobody else closed, I think, is more of an indictment of the rest of the field and doesn't really say that much about the race flow. If Ajaweed had shown up, I think he would have been a lot closer at the end. He just didn't run his race. But Sol Volante, I don't know what to make of him moving forward. I don't know if he always is going to need this kind of setup to be successful, because he also got a fast pace to close into in the Mucho Macho Man. But this was an encouraging step forward. So he's not a horse that I would be willing to knock that much.
Yeah, and just one more thing on Independence Hall. If you ask me, I would say he's probably more of a one-turn horse, but it has to do with what you said. He just seems a little too keen early on. He doesn't want to relax, and that generally points to sprinting. But, if he was my horse, I'm going to continue on and give him another shot on the Derby trail because, he wasn't terrible. But at the end of the day, like you said, the figure is the figure, and the 113 for the winner and the 111 for Independence Hall are not really anywhere near the top of the list. We've seen a lot of faster performances, so they will definitely have to improve out of this. And the one thing is that quick early pace there were no excuses for not running faster. The pace was good enough that if these horses were better at this time of day, they could have easily ran a 117, 118, something in that range, and they didn't do it. So at this point, I would say that, and the Davis, let's not get carried away. It's not one of the top preps on the Derby trail by any means, and it's early in the year, but it's been one of the weaker ones we've seen so far.
Yeah, and the one final point I'll make about Independence Hall that I don't want to have get lost, because we're a couple performances removed from the race now, is the one race for Independence Hall did everything right, from his behavior beforehand to breaking from the gate to in the race, was the Nashua, and he earned a 122 TimeformUS speed figure. Maybe he never gets back to it. That's always a possibility with these young horses. Maybe there are just some kinks to work out. We'll see, and I think we'll learn probably in his next start, because I imagine they're going to keep him at 2 turns and another Derby prep, and I'm very interested to see what he does moving forward. Sticking with the 3-year-olds and moving on to the fillies, we'll wrap up the other stakes from Tampa Bay Downs before we head on to the other Derby preps. The Suncoast was run a couple of races before the Sam F. Davis. This was a listed stakes race going 1 mile and 40 yards. And Lucrezia, a horse that I don't think either of us really viewed as one that would get better with added distance. Apparently, she relished the added ground more than anybody else in this field. I thought Daniel Centeno gave her a really nice ride, backing off the pace a little bit in the first turn and getting her outside of that leader. But she did the rest. She really finished strongly in the lane.
She did. I don't want to get too carried away. It wasn't a very strong race. She only got a 99 Timeform US speed figure for the win, which is going to put her way down the list on the Oaks preps we've seen so far. But, it was a good first effort around 2 turns. It surprised me. I wouldn't have bet this horse, certainly not at 5-1 in this field. But I just thought this race was a bit of a slow poke fest. I'm not going to be too excited about any of them. The one thing that did catch my eye is both Aja Weed in this race, or in the prior race, and Blame Debbie in this one, both coming out of races on Remsen Day, did not run well at all. And that's just something I usually like to take note of. It very well could be. Maybe it's just too short for them. They were both turning back in distance. Blame Debbie almost a full furlong. So I'm sure that had something to do with it, but I would have liked to seen a little more run out of those two.
Yeah, that's something I noticed as well, and it's something to definitely monitor moving forward. And I agree, this is not a race I want to get too carried away about. More than anything, I was just surprised by the winner's performance, but I agree, she doesn't strike me as a true Kentucky Oaks sort of contender. There were a couple of graded stakes races on the turf on that Saturday card at Tampa Bay Downs. They ran the Grade 3 Tampa Bay Stakes right before the Sam F. Davis, and it was a race that sparked a lot of conversation, a little controversy afterwards, as there was a long inquiry, a claim of foul against the winner, Admiralty Pier, who led throughout. He held on and won this race by a nose and was left up as the winner, winning this race at 21-1. The pace situation definitely helped this horse. Some others in behind definitely had real trouble, but I don't want to take anything away from Admiralty Pier because he's a horse that has woken up at Tampa Bay Downs in the past, and he just got back to and improved upon his best ever races here.
He did. He got a 124 Timeform US speed figure for the win, which is, I believe, a career top. He might have run a 123 or something at Tampa a little earlier in his career when losing to Inspector Lindley. It might have been in this very same race, if I remember.
It was.
But yeah, it was a good effort. It was a strange race tactically. I'm not sure what was going on with Real Story. He's a horse who basically always makes the lead, and he seemed to not try for it here. But that's just one of those things I always warn, even as a guy who is largely responsible for the pace projector. I try not to use pace as a main factor when I handicap racing, kind of more to augment my opinions, because if you just rely on what you think's going to happen with the pace and base your whole wager on that, things tend to go astray. And I kind of faltered in this situation where I did that myself, and I went with a horse I didn't really think was all that great in Hembry, thinking it was going to be the pace, and I actually did bet him, and he didn't run very well. But the top horses all ran pretty decent. The tightly bunched finish is always a bit of a warning flag. Devamani, first time in the barn for Chad Brown, seemed to run very well. I thought he would run well. He was a horse we talked about, but he ran a 124 just like the winner. March to the Arch ran very well. Actually looked like he was going to be a winner when he kind of shot up the rail. Looked like he was going to open up, but just flattened out a little bit late. So solid race. I think it is what it is. It was a grade 3 on the class, and that's what it showed in the figures. Probably a pretty strong grade 3 in the mid 120s like this. We've certainly seen weaker already this year, so maybe a couple of these could step up to a grade 2 or even be competitive in a grade 1. It's hard to tell this early in the year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too caught up in turf speed figures because they're just not something that I put that much stock in generally. I look more at the trips in these races. I was surprised that both of these turf stakes at Tampa Bay Downs came up so fast. To me, they didn't seem like above par grade 3 races. So I was just surprised that both of these races seemed very fast on the speed figure scale. March to the Arch, in my opinion, probably should have won this race. He had a little bit of trouble in that incident at the top of the stretch. My take on that incident, by the way, where there was that inquiry, was that the winner, Admiralty Pier, did come out significantly. I think you can really see it when you watch the pan shot, which for whatever reason, the Tampa Bay video crew just decided to never show. But you could really see coming around the far turn, Admiralty Pier was hugging the rail, and then suddenly he was out in 3 or 4 path by the time they got to the stretch. You can't see it on the head-on, or what they were using as a head-on. It wasn't actually a head-on. So I'm not sure why they kept showing that angle. But regardless of all that, March to the Arch ran another solid race. I don't have a whole lot to say about the others. Devamani, I thought he got up. He's just a horse that has a little bit of hang in him, but I thought he did run an improved race for Chad Brown here.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I was surprised there was no DQ, but like I said, I never know what to expect anymore. I think one thing we can agree on is that our country probably needs to do better on these head-ons on turf. It's 2020 now. We need better angles of these things. There's a lot of money riding on them. There's no reason we should be looking at 45-degree on angles and stuff like that these days. As for the speed figures, I would say I was a little surprised. There were a couple other turf races on the day, so it's not like I made them just off of this. And I actually went back and broke out one of the earlier turf races, or these numbers would have came back even higher. So the clock was fair. It seems legitimate, but they're definitely ones that I will track going on, because I had the same reservations as you did.
And that other turf race that we were referring to was the Grade 3 Endeavor earlier in the card, where a race that produced a gigantic upset, because, Got Stormy was a finalist for the Eclipse Award for champion turf female last year. And she just laid over this field from a speed figure, from a class standpoint, bet down to 1-5 for a reason. And I don't know what happened. She had a really long, arduous campaign last year, and maybe it's just catching up with her now. They're starting her off very early in this 2020 season. Maybe she just needs more of a break. She didn't show up here. And with her out of the race, it just wasn't the strongest race overall. And they basically just let Jehozakat get away on the front end. The pace was not fast. They allowed her a clear lead all the way around the racetrack, and they just couldn't get to her late.
Yeah, it was an interesting race in that our pace projector had it shown with Jehozakat and Got Stormy up on the front in a race with very little speed. It had the blue flag. And once Got Stormy didn't go, I right away thought, man, this race might be over, because just watching it, it looked like she was doing it easy up on the front end. And I'm in no way faulting Tyler Gaffleone, or I forget the name that the announcer used for him. It was pretty funny, but you could see Got Stormy just didn't have it. It wasn't that he didn't ride her well or anything. She just had nothing, even in the stretch when, she had no kick. So I'm not sure what happened with her. And, Jehozakat was able to take full advantage. I don't want to take too much away from her performance. It was the best race of her career. She got a 119, but she had run similar before. She had run a 118. She had run a few 115s, I believe. So she certainly has talent, and just took advantage of a situation where the big chalk didn't show up.
Yeah, Jehozakat's a funny horse. I think she's one that a lot of us who study pedigrees have always had an eye on for a long time, because she's been bred to be a top turf horse forever. Her Damn Precious Kitten was, I think, a multiple Grade 1 winner on the turf, and she is a half sister to Kitten's Joy. So, she's been bred to be a really nice turf horse. She actually showed some more promise on dirt recently, but they switched her back to turf here. And with the right trip, she was finally able to produce that kind of effort that I think a lot of people expected out of her a long time ago. We'll see what this race means moving forward. Since the big favorite didn't show up, I'm not sure that I want to put too much stock in it. But maybe the winner has just turned a corner now.
Yeah, what I found interesting about her is she's never really been a front runner on turf, but she went to dirt for those last couple, and they weren't easy spots. They were a stakes race at Laurel and a stakes race at Tampa, and she went right to the front. So maybe that new speed wasn't just a switch of surface. Maybe she's just in top form and has turned a corner as a young 5-year-old mare, which is often when horses are at their best.
One more race to talk about from Tampa Bay Downs before we move on, and it's also for the 3-year-olds. They ran a few maiden races early on this card that seemed to have some quality to them, but the only one that came up significantly fast was the 4th race, going 1 mile and 40 yards for the 3-year-old Colts and Geldings. And Todd Pletcher really dominated this race. He had the winner and the 3rd-place finisher. The winner, Texas Swing, had made one prior start at Gulfstream going a sprint distance. He stretched out for the first time here, and I liked what I saw from him. The pace was fairly moderate and even, but he kicked on well enough in the stretch and seems like one that could go forward from here.
Yeah, he does. He got a 102 TimeformUS speed figure. This time of year, he definitely will have to improve. Like I said, these speed figures are run on the same track where we saw the excuse me, the Sam Davis and the race for the Phillies, the Suncoast, I think it was called. And, so it was pretty solid speed figure making day, no real issues with it. So there's still quite a gap to what Sol Volante ran. He basically ran just a little bit faster than Lucrezia. So I'm not going to get too excited. Definitely need some improvement, but certainly one I wouldn't blame somebody for putting in their stable mail. He certainly handled the 2 turns well first time out.
Yeah, it's a race that I mostly wanted to talk about just because of the pedigrees on these 2 Pletcher horses. They're really bred to be nice ones moving forward. The winner is by Curlin out of a mare named Derby Eve, so you know what the intention is there. But the dam is a half-sister to Colonel John, who was the Travers winner. So there's really pedigree for this horse to get better going longer distances. And the horse that I really am interested in out of this race is the 3rd-place finisher, who was a first-time starter for Todd Pletcher. Just one who seemed to run in spots and was really coming on the last 1/8 of a mile, even though the race wasn't falling apart. The top 2 were finishing in this race, and this horse was getting to them at the end. I know Richard Grunder pronounced the name Geocare. I would imagine it's actually pronounced Giocare, the Italian word for to play. But this horse is also by Curlin, and he's out of a dam who's a half-sister to a Fleet Alex. So obviously that horse is bred to go much longer. So I'd follow both of these horses moving forward, mostly because of their pedigrees. Let's move on to Santa Anita and discuss that other major Derby prep from this past weekend. That was the San Vicente on Sunday, going the 7 furlongs. And this was billed as a matchup between last year's 2-year-old champion Storm the Court and the newcomer Nadal, who won his debut so impressively last month at Santa Anita. They bet it like it was a 1-horse race, and I guess they were right because Nadal got the job done at a crazy low price of 1-5. What did you make of this performance from Nadal? Because, again, I saw kind of 2 takes here. I think some people were surprised he had to work so hard for this victory.
It was a fast race. There's no doubt in my mind about that. He got a 1:18 TimeformUS speed figure. Now, I will say the final time was only a 1:11. I had some questions on Twitter. I guess the buyer came back a 91, which actually lines up perfectly with our 1:11. I thought it was going to come back a little higher originally, but I talked with my assistant. He does California. He's the guy that's actually out there. He knows that track inside and out. Now, I wasn't paying a lot of attention. I was a little under the weather this weekend. And, he pointed out it had rained early in the day and some things I had missed. So I have no issues whatsoever with the figure that he gave. The one issue I do have with it is quite a bit of a boost from the pace, which isn't always a great sign for horses stretching out, which obviously Nadal is going to want to do. I think I heard the Rebel is next up for him. But all in all, I mean, what more could you ask for from a second start? He's obviously a very fast, talented horse. Ginobili in second was probably a bit of a surprise, but he was a horse who had run very big in his debut. He got a really nice, not his debut, but in his maiden win. When he got a really nice figure that day. He was kind of rushed into the Del Mar Futurity. He didn't run well. Then they tried turf for whatever reason. So he really tailed off after that maiden win. But I had pointed out on Twitter, if you want to look up my post, he came out of a really strong maiden race. A lot of winners have come out of that race, all in fast time with good figures. So I think the time off did him well, and I suspect he is back to form, and hopefully he won't get rushed again because he's obviously a talented horse as well. I think all the top 4 in here ran well. Fast Enough ran third. Decent effort. He sat off the pace a little bit. And even Storm the Court, who looked like a well-beaten 4th. I mean, he was only beaten a little over 2 lengths in a race he probably wasn't fully cranked for. And he wound up with a 1:12 TimeformUS speed figure, which is just a few points off of his Breeders' Cup Juvenile win.
Yeah, I have similar feelings about this race. It's funny that you mentioned the final time speed figure and the TimeformUS speed figure and what that means for stretching out, because I was actually going to make the exact same point that I'm not sure how much I care about the pace bonus that a horse like Nadal got in this race, because he's going to have to stretch out next time out. And he ran the time that he ran. I was interested that Joel Rosario had to ride him so hard in the stretch, because Joel Rosario is just naturally more of a hands and heels kind of guy. And he really, got into this horse past the 8th pole, took the whip out, went to a strong left-handed whip to get this horse past Ginobili in the lane. It's nice that he stepped up and ran a faster speed figure here. Based on the final time, he basically repeated his debut performance. We talked about it back when we discussed his debut, that he is a horse who's bred to stretch out in distance and all of that. I found it interesting they didn't try to rate him at all in this race, even though the pace was quick. They were really intent on holding that inside position heading into the turn. And he actually was getting a little bit outrun by Ginobili coming to the quarter pole, but he battled back in the lane. I mean, there's obviously a ceiling on how high you could have made the speed figure in this race because, I mean, you'd kind of have to suspend belief to think that Ginobili and Fast Enough would get so much faster from their prior races into this one if the speed figure came back much higher than it did. So Nadal, I'm still not sure what to make of him. Maybe you just trust in Bob Baffert to get these horses to the Kentucky Derby as these undefeated sensations. For my money, for every Justify, there's a Coliseum, though, and I'm not sure which one Nadal is yet, per se. So we'll see. As for Storm the Court, he got no love out of this race, but I thought he ran fine. I think he validated this Breeders' Cup Juvenile wasn't really a fluke because going a distance that probably is short of his best, he ran a similar speed figure here, and he was off the bridle for the entire way. Flavien Prat was trying to keep him really close to that fast pace, and he had to ride him really hard to do it. He went wide on the far turn, and I know he got beaten by a long shot like Fast Enough, but he was running on well at the end of this race. He galloped out in front. There were a lot of things to like about this race for me from Storm the Court, and I think he's one that you can expect to improve going out to 2 turns next time.
Yeah, I do want to say Nadal, one thing, man, he sure looks like he's built like a sprinter to me. Breeding aside, normally a big, strong horse like that is more of a sprinter type. So we'll see what happens with him. I am wondering what you think about the breeding on Ginobili and how that bodes for him going 2 turns, because I imagine they're going to give him a shot on the Derby Trail as well.
You're catching me a little off guard here. I don't know his pedigree off the top of my head. He's by Munnings. I don't know the dam side that well, so we'll see. To me, he looks like a pure sprinter based on what I've seen from him on the racetrack, but I guess you never know what these horses might do when they're actually faced with a 2-turn test. But he's not one that really struck me as a true kind of Derby horse, so we'll have to see where they go with him. Moving on to a Kentucky Oaks prep on Saturday at Santa Anita, we saw the Grade 2 Las Virgenes, where it was really just a one-horse race. The story coming in was all about that impressive maiden winner, Venetian Harbor, and she handled the test here going the 2-turn mile. What this race means as far as her prospects on the Kentucky Oaks Trail, I'm not sure. Obviously, she ran fast, and I'm not going to fault anybody who says that she's now the leading contender for the Kentucky Oaks. She really hasn't faced a test yet, though.
No, she hasn't. She's run fast, obviously, the last couple times. She broke her maiden setting a moderate pace, but flying home. Her final time speed figure that day was a 1:18, which is just crazy for a 3-year-old filly. But, that was a bit pace-aided. But, she did it again. She ran fast. She set a solid pace. The question is there's just nobody near her. So, I mean, she opened up a huge lead. She kind of let everybody into the race and then just pulled away late. The 1:13 TimeformUS speed figure certainly bodes well. It compares well with what we've seen from others. I mean, compared to a race like the Suncoast, what looked crazy in it. I mean, she would have probably been 1-9 in that field as well. So you just need to see her against more competition, but she's certainly promising, and it will be interesting to see who she faces next time because there are a lot of good fillies out in California right now.
Yes, and she has run faster now than the other major 3-year-old filly contenders out there. She's certainly run faster than a horse like Taraz, who we discussed last week, and even Harvey's Logoyle, and especially the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies winner, British Idiom. So they all have to step up to this level now, this benchmark that she's set. Though I still am a little concerned about Venetian Harbor going longer distances. She got it done against nobody in this race and handled the 2-turn test, but I didn't love the way that she just ran off into the first turn and opened up 6 lengths on the field. You can't do that when you're facing real competition. She's got to relax a little bit. And her pedigree doesn't strike me as the kind of pedigree that suggests that more distance is going to be to her liking. She's another one who's by Munnings. And the dam side is really way more sprinty. Her dam was a pure sprinter. The dam actually traces directly back to Safely Kept, who was a top sprinter back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I'm not sure that she's a true classic distance kind of horse, but obviously she's running fast enough that she's going to be a major factor in these races moving forward, at least until we get to the Kentucky Oaks.
Right. I do think there's always a question when horses just have these run-off wire-to-wire wins. They're going to get fast figures most of the time, especially when they're as talented as she is. But, it just comes down to you want to take a short price when they face more pressure and better competition. And generally, for me, the answer is no. She's not that much faster. And, there's some other horses out there who have shown some grit. A horse like Bast, who just keeps winning, even though she doesn't run quite as fast as Venetian Harbor did here, but it doesn't mean she can or that one won't regress with some pressure. So I'm really excited about this 3-year-old filly division this year, not just in California. As I mentioned, the horse from New York last week. There are some good fillies out there this year, and a lot. I don't think we're going to see a sprinter win the Eclipse this year. I'll make that prediction pretty early. Not exactly a bold one, but I think it's a pretty strong crop.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that yet. It's certainly deep and competitive. I'll give you that. We've seen a lot of contenders who are in the mix still right now in February. Wrapping up the action for Santa Anita last weekend, they ran the Grade 3 Thunder Road on Saturday's card. And this is one that I know you were probably laughing about when you saw the result of this race, because we had talked about Riverboyne quite a bit on the TimeformUS Forecast on Friday last week, and how neither of us really liked this horse. I know you had signed the divorce papers long ago with him, but he got the perfect trip in this race and finally was able to capitalize on it.
He did. I watched this race live, and I could just tell he was going to win the whole way, and I was just laughing at myself. All the backers of Riverboyne can thank me early. Thank me now for mushing myself and mushing him right into the winner's circle. But he finally delivered on the promise he just showed as a 3-year-old. I actually couldn't believe it. Somebody had asked me on Twitter if this was his first win in a stakes race against older horses, and I figured he had won at least one somewhere along the way, but he actually hadn't. So it was his first win against older. He got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is basically what he runs all the time. He's been a bridesmaid and runs good seconds and thirds with troubled trips, but he just finally worked himself into a good trip. The pace was surprisingly slow early. Rarely do we have a first quarter coated in blue and nothing else, but that's what happened here. He was able to get good position, and you could kind of tell it was slow when Kingley easily made the lead from the outside without a lot of urging, and he just out-tripped the others in here. It's not a particularly strong Grade 3, only a 120 speed figure, but solid enough effort from him, and if they can keep him together, I imagine he could probably win a few more, but I'm not going for the re-wedding. I'm going to stay divorced from him.
Yeah, I think everything came together for him in this race. I'm not sure that I'd want him going forward. There were some no-shows in this race that I think helped him a little bit. I mean, you could see that just by the fact that you had a horse that seemed like a hopeless long shot hanging on for second here. I didn't love the trip that the third place finisher True Valor got. Coming out of the gate, I don't know why they were just ripping his face off, and he to get back behind horses, because this was not a race that featured a lot of pace. Not that he was way back, and he was on the rail, but I just think they made a tactical error coming out of the gate with him. And then coming to the top of the stretch, obviously Riverboyne was the horse you wanted to follow in the lane, and he was right behind him because he was the one with momentum. But for some reason, his rider, Andrea Azzani, decided to go outside and run into the back of a tiring horse. So I don't know what that was all about. He probably wouldn't have beaten Riverboyne anyway. I think he would have been a clear second in this race. The one other horse I'd want to mention is Frontier Market, who only finished fifth, but he was really the only horse that was making up significant ground in the stretch into what turned out to be a slow pace. Even though a fast pace was projected in this race, it just never materialized. Still, though, Frontier Market didn't exactly improve on his races for Chad Brown, so I think you'd be hoping to see more out of him. Let's move on to Aqueduct and the rest of the venues that we're going to discuss on this Pacecast. And just one race from there this weekend. That was the Jimmy Winkfield for the 3-year-olds. Not sure if this is actually going to be a Derby prep, but we saw Montauk Traffic, who was coming off just a maiden victory for Linda Rice, step right up and win a stakes the same way that Max Player did in the Withers a couple weeks ago. Montauk Traffic is a horse that has been pretty green in his races, and he's slowly but surely figuring things out, and he took another step in the right direction here.
Yeah, Linda Rice has become a personal favorite of mine these last couple of weeks. I seem to have a good read on her lately. And this was a horse who, if you were betting him based on speed figures, you would have expected a lot better price than what you got. But I think it's just kind of her MO. The horses do what they need to do to win. And he got the perfect setup, as was predicted by the pace projector. Secret Rules kind of outran the other speeds, hung around for a long time, but was really no match in the lane for Montauk Traffic. He improved to a 105 TimeformUS speed figure off his 90 win last time, and just a really good effort from him. Secret Rules actually got a 109, which was a step up from his last, due to the fast pace. And it wasn't just the fast pace; he was dueling on the lead doing it. So that is something we account for. You don't get as much credit if you're out there by yourself running too fast, because that's generally a negative instead of a positive. But when you are in a battle like he was, albeit with a very long shot in Johnny Ritt, but that one actually hung around and run really well also. So I thought this was a pretty strong race for the 3-year-old sprinters this time of year. I would imagine, as you said, this isn't a Derby prep at all. I forget there's another 3-year-old race that comes up at Aqueduct that I imagine we'll see some of these in again, but pretty solid effort from all of the top three.
Yeah, and the thing that I really liked about Montauk Traffic's performance was that even though he got the pace set up, he still wasn't in a good spot coming around the far turn. He was right down on the rail, getting shuffled back, taking all of this kickback, and he actually was back to last at a certain point about the 3/8 pole. And horses that are down inside that are already showing some greenness in the races, they don't usually overcome that kind of trip. And he squeezed through on the inside, altered course in the lane, put in a very similar effort to the one we saw out of Sir Winston a few weeks ago when he won that optional claiming race second off the layoff. And I just liked the way that Montauk Traffic overcame that slight bit of traffic trouble and finished off this race, even not changing leads in the lane. He still was able to get past these horses on the front end. So I think there might be another forward move in him. And I'd imagine they're going to move on to the Gotham next. That's a 1-turn mile. So it seems like the perfect progression for this horse. And he's the one that I'd want out of this race more so than the others, especially if we're talking about potential Derby horses.
That's right. I forgot the Gotham is back to 1 turn again. We had that time when they were running it on the inner, it was 2. Yep. That is actually the race I was thinking of. I agree with you on the trip. There was a time watching the race where I didn't think he was going to do much. It looked like he was just not really getting into the bit and not going to finish. And then all of a sudden he just kicked it in. It was a real professional move. So I did like what I saw from him. And the 1-turn mile certainly looked within his scope.
Sticking with the sprinters, but moving on to the older runners, we saw the King Cotton for the 4-and-up horses going 6 furlongs at Oakland Park on Saturday. And a couple of really nice sprinters turned up in this race. One of them obviously being Whitmore, who just is this admirable 7-year-old who just seems to keep showing up with top performances no matter what age he is. And the winner of this race, Share the Upside, who is capable of posting an impressive speed figure from time to time, doesn't always do it. He hasn't really maintained that consistency throughout his career, but he was at his best in this race. The trip did work out for him because he got to a clear lead, and that's always going to help a horse like him. But Whitmore had his chance to get by him in the lane, and Share the Upside just turned him back.
Yeah, personally, I was rooting for Whitmore. Just he's an old favorite of mine, and I thought maybe he was going to do it. But Share the Upside just dug in and was able to hold on. As you said, maybe that was part, not even hold on. I mean, he held sway pretty easily. He got a nice 124 TimeformUS speed figure. He's done that a few times in the past, running the mid 120s. He does seem to be a horse who really likes Oakland. He's won there more than a few times now. I think it's maybe his 4th win in 5 tries with a second. But you could say the same for Whitmore. He's a horse who also loves Oakland, has won a ton of races there. So the top 2 ran very well, 124, 121. It was a pretty big gap back to 3rd and Silver Ride. So, I was impressed by those 2, and there's a series of sprint stakes at Oakland, and I'm sure we'll probably see these 2 hook up again next time.
Earlier in that card on Saturday at Oakland Park, we saw an intriguing newcomer to this country, La Renolita, who won her U.S. debut after 4 starts in Argentina, having won all of those, including a Group 1 race down there on the dirt. Wasn't facing the toughest allowance field here by any stretch of the imagination, but I think you had to like what you saw from her because she never seemed to be traveling all that well. Coming to the top of the stretch, it looked like maybe she'd win the race by 2 lengths, 3 lengths. But once they got into the final furlong, she just kicked into another gear and really drew away from this field late. I wouldn't be surprised to see her even want to go longer distances in the future, just given the stamina that she showed here.
Yeah, this was an impressive race. This was one that I did not get to see live. And when I sat down to do the speed figures, I kind of had to do a double take and go, wait, whoa, what was this race? Because, it just didn't look like a race. We didn't have any figures on that horse to do projections. So I wasn't sure who this horse was that jumped up and ran this big number. But she wound up getting a 110 TimeformUS speed figure, which is certainly a very good performance. First time in the country. We're not talking about the race from Sunday at Aqueduct, but it would get a similar speed figure to the stakes win that we saw there on Sunday. So it's a good effort, and I think the sky's the limit with her. She's obviously one of those horses that's very talented, very quick, and looks like she can run all day.
Yeah, the one thing I'll just note about this race is that there was one other horse who took money in this race, Calf Moon Bay, who acted up very badly in the gate and I think even reared up. And for whatever reason, she was not a vet scratch, but she was eased during the running of the race. So the race did get a little easier for the winner, but still a promising performance first time in this country. And she's in good hands with Steve Asmussen. So I would be interested to see where she goes next, because outside of Midnight Bisou, I think that older female division is a little bit wide open right now. Moving on to Gulfstream Park, the big race they ran this past weekend there was the Grade 3 Suwannee River on the turf, going 1 mile and a 16th. And an old favorite, Starship Jubilee, got the job done, ended up winning in pretty decisive fashion. The real strength for her is just the versatility of her running style. She can go to the lead and lay down pretty slow fractions, or she can sit off the pace and unleash a turn of foot that you like to see on the turf. Just makes her really dangerous and really hard to beat in these races. And she just worked out a much better trip than her main rival, Magic Star.
She did. She got a 116 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. We have the fractions all coded in red. They were right on the borderline, so it's not like it was a crazy fast pace. But her and Magic Star were both off of it a bit. And really, I think the difference here, maybe Starship Jubilee wins anyway, but it doesn't happen often. But Luis Saez kind of trapped Irad Ortiz inside and just got the better of the trips. He outrode him in this particular race where Magic Star wasn't able to get her run. Like you said, I don't know if she'd have been good enough to beat her anyway, but I'm pretty confident saying that the 4-length gap between the two is not really representative of the difference in ability. And I'd be interested to see these two match up again, because I think it could turn the other way. The real surprise for me was that Magic Star actually went off the favorite in here. I'm not sure, looking at the PPs, how people could do that, but I guess sometimes you just can't resist some Chad Brown.
Yeah, Starship Jubilee. I mean, she's an admirable kind of mare. She's won now 16 of 34 races in her life. This was actually her first graded stakes win in the United States, which kind of surprised me a little bit when I looked it up. All of her prior graded stakes wins had come up in Canada, even though I think she's won 10 times at Gulfstream. This was her first graded stakes win there. Yeah, she was impressive in victory. Would she have won anyway, even if Magic Star got the right trip? I kind of think she would have. I don't think Magic Star would have made up that 4-length gap. My take on Magic Star is, and Chad Brown, I doubt you're listening, but if you are, why are we not running this horse on the dirt? This is a horse who trained so well on the dirt in Saratoga last summer, working in company with Dunbar Road. They put her on the turf first time out, and to me, she just doesn't have that turf turn of foot that's going to allow her to ascend to the next level in these races. But she just seems like one of these horses that can run all day. She's a real big galloping sort of filly, and her pedigree is all dirt on the dam side especially. I know she's a daughter of Scat Daddy who can go either way, but the dam side pedigree is all dirt, and I just don't understand why we're trying to make this horse a turf horse when it seems like she's shown some ability, at least to my eye, on the dirt in the mornings. Maybe they'll switch it up in the future eventually, but to me, it seems like Chad Brown has enough good turf horses that he could try this filly on the dirt at some point.
Yeah, it certainly seems worth a shot, and I'm going to put her in my stable mail with your recommendation if she pops up on dirt, to remember that.
One other race that I wanted to discuss from the Saturday card at Gulfstream was a maiden race that took place early in the day that came up surprisingly fast. It was for the 4-year-olds and older, so not terribly young horses, but the winner, Golden Tappet, making his first start for trainer Brendan Walsh, coming off just one dirt performance last year where he showed absolutely nothing, got on turf for the first time here and really woke up in a big way, and I think put forth a promising performance for this horse's future prospects. He's got an awesome pedigree, and to me, he ran even better than the speed figure indicates because he was breaking from an outside post position, broke outward, then had to be rushed up to get into a position close to the pace. Still was a little green in the lane, but really kicked it in the final furlong. I just really liked what I saw from this horse off the layoff in his turf debut.
Yeah, he got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure. That's not one you generally see for maiden breakers, even older ones like this. I do want to put a little caution out there as far as the clock. Gulfstream's been having all kind of problems on the turf. I get the data feed, and then the next day I get notifications that the times have been removed from the races. I haven't seen anything on this one, but it's one I'm definitely going to go back in time on my own just to be sure. But overall, I do think it was a strong race, as you say. If the fractions can be believed, the pace was pretty slow. And this horse really just kicked in and was able to finish off strong anyway. So he's certainly a horse with some promise. What you say about the breeding just adds to that further for me. And I want to see where he shows up because he certainly has the look of a potential stakes horse based on that effort.
Yeah, just to actually get it out there, he's a full brother to Untappable, that excellent 3-year-old filly champion from a number of years ago, and he's a half brother to Patio Prado, who was almost, I think, a Grade 1 winner on turf. So obviously this horse is bred to be nice. Sticking with horses with awesome pedigrees, we saw another one of those on Friday at Gulfstream Park as Chad Brown's dirt filly, Royal Flag, won her second straight start routing. She's now 2 for 3 lifetime. Wasn't beating anything in this race per se, but I just liked the way that she did it. She earned a respectable final time, very similar to the speed figure that we saw out of La Reynolita at Oakland Park, and just seems like a horse with some potential to move forward into stakes company now.
Yeah, she got a 111 for the win. It was her second time routing, but first time around that second turn, which sometimes can be a differentiator, but she handled it well. You have to like the way she finished. And I mean, it was not the strongest field she beat, but it wasn't a terrible field either. Violent Trick's been a horse who's been in pretty decent form, and she ran by her like she was standing still. So this is certainly a filly with some promise, and another who I imagine we're going to see in stakes soon. This was her second allowance win. Oh, no, her first allowance win, but we don't see many non-winners at 2 anymore. So it's either stakes or bust for the most part for these horses.
Yeah, and especially given the quality of some of those stakes races that we've been seeing at Gulfstream Park for those older fillies and mares, it's not like she's going to have to run too much faster to beat horses like Pink Sands and the others that we've been seeing winning those races. So I'd be interested to see if she steps up into stakes company next. And she's certainly got the potential to improve because she's a full sister to Eagle, who was a multiple graded stakes winner on dirt, and she's a half sister to Catalina Cruiser. So she definitely has that pedigree to be a brilliant dirt performer. We'll wrap things up down in Louisiana. We'll start at the fairgrounds, where on Saturday they ran the Chantel Lannery Memorial Stakes for the 3-year-old fillies on the turf. And Alms, the winner of this race, is really stamping herself as arguably the leader of this division. I know that Sharing won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf last year, but Alms is now running speed figures that are just significantly faster than we saw out of any of those 2-year-old fillies last year. She's taken a step forward. She's still undefeated. I'm just interested to see how far she wants to go because she obviously has a ton of ability.
Yeah, she does. She got a 112 TimeformUS speed figure, which, to put in a little perspective, that's the kind of figure we were seeing 3-year-old fillies last year win big Grade 1 races with in July and August. So, you know, granted, this was only a $60,000 stakes race, but it was a fairly decent field, and she just toyed with them. And not only did she toy with them, it's not like the pace was a little on the slow side through the middle part of the race, but she sat off of it and just was able to take over whenever she wanted to and drew away. So probably I would say the most impressive winner in the division so far. I don't know if you want to say she's the leader of the division because she's only won that Grade 3 matron at Belmont, I think it was. But speed figure wise, she's just looked really good, and the sky's the limit for her.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem saying she's the leader of the division. She's won 3 stakes in a row now. I don't know who else out there she really has to beat to be considered the leader of the division. I mean, I guess Sharing beat some European horses in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf last year. But you never know how these horses are going to progress from 2 to 3 years old. And Alms has obviously already taken that step forward. The only thing that's a little bit concerning for me is that she gets very keen early in her races. And she showed that tendency again here. She was really tugging at Paco Lopez early. Part of that was due to the fact that they kept backing the pace down, especially onto the backstretch. But you want to see her relax a little bit better if she's going to handle longer distances, which she might have to in the future, especially if they target some of those races in New York through the summer. But she's running speed figures at this point that say everybody else has to improve to catch up to her. Then on Sunday at the fairgrounds, we saw a horse return from last year that I had kind of forgotten about. By my standards, the winner of last year's Louisiana Derby. And as I think back about it, he's actually the horse that was a big hype horse going into the Kentucky Derby. Derby week, it seemed like everybody was saying that he was training better than everybody else. He ended up not taking a whole lot of money on Derby Day, but he was almost that horse that was the wise guy horse heading into the Kentucky Derby. Didn't run well that day in the slop. Has not been seen since until last Sunday, but boy, you couldn't have asked a horse to return in better fashion than he did.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch this race. My partner does the figures for the fairground, so I don't have an official figure, but I did pull up the worksheet this morning to kind of see what he ran, and my guess is it's going to be about a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. It certainly looks like a strong effort, and no doubt he's thrust himself right back into the he can be considered right up there with a lot of the older horses we've seen this year. We haven't seen a whole lot of breakout performances outside the Pegasus, which got that big number from the I'm already forgetting his name. The Mucho horse.
Mucho Gusto.
Mucho Gusto. For some reason, I wanted to say Mucho Macho Man, and I knew that wasn't right. But certainly plenty of promise here. This was a horse who was running in the high 1-teens. He ran a 117 when he won that Louisiana Derby last year. And coming back as a bigger, stronger 4-year-old, did exactly what you want to see. He ran a faster speed figure, and there's probably more in the tank.
Yeah, and for anybody who hasn't seen this race, it was the 7th race on Sunday at the fairgrounds. I'd recommend you watch it because in addition to running a fast time, I mean, Gabriel Saez just never moved his hands on this horse. I mean, he just did it all on his own, won so easily. It was just kept ticking off those 12-second furlongs, even into the final portion of the race. And he was really drawing off impressively in the end. Again, I don't know if he's a classic distance kind of horse because he did win that Louisiana Derby going 1.1 miles last year, never got tested over that 1.25 miles distance. But he seems like a horse to me that could take that step forward to be near the top of the handicap division based on this performance. So I'd be very interested to see where they go from here and if he can continue improving second off the layoff. One more race to talk about on this Pacecast, and that's another race from down in Louisiana, actually a race for Louisiana-bred horses at Delta Downs. That was the Premier Night Prince Stakes on their Louisiana-bred card there on Saturday night. And a horse that we've talked about, I think, twice now on the Pacecast already, No Parole for Tom Amos, had won a couple of races at the fairgrounds against state breds very impressively, both in sprint races. He stretched out to the 2 turns here, going a mile over that bullring track at Delta Downs, and he won impressively again, but I think the story remains the same. He's not running the kinds of speed figures that signal that he's going to be any kind of Triple Crown contender.
No, and I only mentioned I wanted to talk about this a little. His horse seems to be getting quite a bit of hype lately, and I heard Tom Amos mention that he'd like to take a shot on the Derby Trail and try a points race. He said he thinks the horse has earned that, and certainly no argument with that. I mean, you got to give a horse like this a shot, but I just don't see it personally. He's just hasn't run very fast. I know people like to say, well, he could have run faster, and he's done it easy, but he's just not facing any real competition so far in his races, and most of the time these horses are going to falter when they step up and face better horses. Now, I'm not saying if he shows up in a race like the Rebel, or I don't know where he would show up next, but that he, if he's a huge price, I wouldn't blame anybody for taking a shot. But given the hype around this horse and the margins he's been winning by, that's probably not going to happen. So he's the kind of horse I'm almost always going to be against until he shows me a little bit more.
Yeah, I will say he looks like a beautiful horse. I mean, just watching him in action, he seems like he's built like a tank and he's got this lovely fluid stride on him. He's just not earning speed figures that suggest he's in that upper echelon of the 3-year-olds. And also, I'm not sure he's a horse that really is going to be best going 2 turns down the line. He showed a lot of speed in those sprint races, and I would think if he is a top-level horse, it would be more going those shorter distances. But you never know. I'm not going to blame the connections for taking a shot because you basically just have one chance to do it at this time of year if you've got a top 3-year-old. So obviously, you want to maximize those potential derby points if you can nab them. That's all for the TimeformUS Pacecast this week. A lot of races that we covered. Of course, we'll be back to discuss next weekend's racing on the TimeformUS forecast this upcoming Friday. We'll stick with the Derby prep races. I'm sure we'll be discussing both divisions of the Risen Star, which will take place at the Fairgrounds on Saturday. And there was some other racing that we'll talk about next weekend. But for now, make sure to listen to us, as always, on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. So that's it for this week. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll be back again on Friday to handicap next weekend's races.